Hello, welcome to the last lecture of our course outline. Today we are looking at chapter 15, which is on supply chain management. At the end of this learning outcome, students are supposed to place supply chain and purchasing and supply function. We also want to know the role and importance of the purchasing and supply function, explain the application of the management function of planning, organizing, and control in purchasing and supply, illustrate and explain the logical steps to be followed in purchasing and supply transaction, indicate the role of purchasing and supply in quality decisions, explain the quality decisions in purchasing supply, give an overview of selection, management, and development, pinpoint certain aspects of pricing as purchasing and supply activity, place right time of purchasing and supply. This presentation is going to be brief as I start with the introduction, the importance of the purchasing and supply function to the business, the market task of purchasing and supply manager, purchasing process and activities. Until recently, most discussion have not focused on purchasing and supply. And today it has become one of the most important aspects in businesses because it is also linked with the other functional duties of general management. So purchasing and supply is very, very important. It is linked with planning, organizing, and controlling of activities. It is not just about the buying and selling, which anybody can do, but you have to buy strategic point, because if you do not ensure that you have the right amount of resources or right amount of goods that are needed in the production operation businesses, it will halt operations. You cannot be able to produce. So you always must ensure that the supply of raw materials, the supply of goods to the customers are basically on time. You should have a certain level of amount in stock, and when you have a certain amount of your goods in stock, you can be able to achieve supply goods and maintain your customers. Because if there's break in supply of goods and raw materials and it affects your customers may tend to look out for other places. So to put it simple, purchasing and supply management entails in planning, organizing, controlling, and leading and controlling of all activities relating to purchasing of materials and services. Now we can also talk about the supply chain network. So the supply chain is a network of organizations linked to each other through buying and selling. It is linked to each other through buying and selling. So if you're a supplier, you must make sure that you deliver goods in time and on time, so that it will not halt business operations. It will not halt other aspects in terms of the financial, in terms of the management functions. So what is the purpose of purchasing and supply function? So purchasing and supply function is not only to provide the right materials, services, and equipment, but also to ensure that they are purchased at a reasonable price. You are able to satisfy quality requirements and are required in the correct quantity. So these are three things that we should bear in mind in terms of when you're purchasing, that you are purchasing at the right price, you are able to satisfy the quality in terms of requirement and also in terms of quantity. Now, the purpose of purchasing and supply has been therefore outlined below, and let me just take this one by one and try to explain. So purchasing and supply function, one of the purposes is to select suppliers. You should be a system of selecting suppliers in terms of when they tender in with these suppliers, who are going to be reliable, and their materials quality, are their materials, do they have the available resource? If you want to buy from this particular supplier, do they have the amount that is needed in terms of your business operations? Another purpose in terms of purchasing and supply is to purchase and arrange for transport of materials to the business. So in terms of purchasing and arranging for transport, sometimes your suppliers can give you transport. Sometimes you should make sure that where you are purchasing, there should be some transport network network that will be able to move the resources or the goods or the material that are basically whether a finished good to be able to transport. We will be able to transport. You will be able to transport it to the needed location, whether to the final consumer, to the warehouse, or to the business enterprise where operations are going on. Decide what prices to accept. So one important functions or purpose in terms of the purchasing and supply is that basically there may be several markets in play or several goods and services. Once there are several goods and services, people supplying, what are the prices that are selling? Because you should be able to also select the price that will help you to make the needed profit, which is the main objective of a business. And with these prices, the prices should also go with the quantity and the quality, as I've already talked about. You should also determine the quantity and the quality of the materials or services. You don't just think about the price, but you think about the goods that are being used, because sometimes you may need the commodity in a certain term of quality where you are going to transform them. So if you go to buy something that is not of quality and you try to do something of less quality, you should know that consumers will be willing to buy it at a higher price when the quality is guaranteed. That is why most consumers tend to buy from certain shops, because they know that once they go to that particular shop, their quality of the goods are guaranteed. So those not just have to think about the price, but think about the quantity and the quality of the things that you buy. Expedient and receive materials. In terms of when you order, are the materials going to arrive in time? Are they going to arrive in time when you need those goods to produce, or when you know those consumers need those goods to satisfy their want? So if you're a bread seller, for example, and you know that mostly the demand for bread is in the morning when people use bread for breakfast, and you could try to therefore not produce at that particular time, people go to the shop at that time and bread is not available, but you tend to produce it in the afternoon where people demand for bread may have gone maybe low. That will also not be of good importance to the business. Control warehouse and inventory holding. One, this is very, very important. You should know is that warehouse, actually, if you tend to store more goods in warehouse, it comes at a cost. And in terms of inventory holding, the amount of goods or amount of finished or unfinished product that are kept either to be used in production or kept in the warehouse to be supplied to consumers. So if you are unable to take control in terms of control the amount that is available, and you produce, and you store them just in the warehouse, it means that you are not able to sell, and it also comes at a cost. So you should know that you should have a minimum level of amount in warehouse that will be enough when there's a demand for the goods in the terms of the market, or enough for to be used in production. So this is very important. Determining the timing of purchases. That is also another important aspect in terms of purchasing and supply. Once you supply goods to the market, you should be able to know seasonal kinds of demand in periods when maybe you think that the demand is high. So you know the timing. What in terms of winter, in terms of summer, what kind of goods do you produce to attract the market? Those kind of particular timing is very important. In the morning, what kind of goods are being purchased? You have to have data to back all those things in order for you to, get the maximum benefit in everything that you do. So in terms of talking about the purpose of purchasing and supply, now we can summarize these purposes into three main importance in terms of purchasing and supply function to the business. So one important thing we can talk about is the greatest expenditure for the business in terms of the greatest expenditure. Now, once a business, you are spending on the input cost, and once you're able to reduce the cost of input or reduce the cost of purchases, so in terms of your expenditure, you are able to save costs and contribute to your business profit. Another thing too we have also talked about is the inventory holding. In the inventory holding, we've talked about the stock that are held in terms of the present disruption, where there is interruption in the flow of business. The aim, basically, as I said earlier, our aim is to keep inventory levels low without risking an interruption in the operation business. So here, the idea is that with the goods that are being kept, if it is in terms of goods that are final goods that are supposed to be supplied to consumers, there should be a right quantity kept in such a way that when consumers need the goods, you'll be able to supply, so that there wouldn't be break in terms of the process of distribution. And when you have in terms of raw material, you should also be having enough raw material that are needed, so that when production starts, there wouldn't be any interruption in the production processes. And we can also talk about in terms of the contribution to the marketing of the products. So in terms of the marketing of the product, one important thing is that marketing contributes in terms of the right quality, in terms of the right time, in terms of manufacture, are all part of the marketing strategies, or all part of in terms of the end products or forms in which it can contribute to the reasonable price. And whatever price, because all of these expenditures in terms of the quality that you purchase, in terms of the time that are being used, in terms of the manufacturer, in terms of other such as the security gate or the final product, the price that is given to the final product to the consumers, or what consumers pay, basically will form parts or will affect the profit level of a firm. So you should know that whatever thing that you are doing contributes to certain significant or certain portion of your expenditure. So to ask you, maybe in your businesses that you are doing, did you spend 80% in terms of your input cost, or how much did you spend? So effective purchasing, what you buy, can facilitate a business product and contribute indirectly to the financial performance of your business through the marketing function. How you are able to market your goods out there, how you are able to, in terms of let people know the type, the quality, the style, and the brand. These are all part of marketing. So marketing, before you market, you must know the quality, the price, and the input costs that have already been attained, the people that involved. Then you tend to market. Once you market, then you get what they call the brand loyalty. Consumers are able to attest to your quality, the style, the brand, and consumers get used to. And that is very, very important function in terms of the financial performance, because it indirectly contributes to your financial stance as a business. So if you are being given an opportunity to function as a purchasing and supply manager, what is your responsibility, or what are some of the responsibilities that you do? Now, as a purchasing and supply manager, one important thing is to do what we call planning. So purchasing and supply planning, and here planning can occur at the various levels of businesses. It can occur, so planning of the purchasing and supply, like planning in business itself and other functional managers. So planning can take place in different strategic levels. It can also take place at the tactical levels or at the operations level. So at the strategic level, for example, planning will entail the manager providing input to the business. So how do you get input so that it can be used in the production process? In terms of the tactical planning, in terms of here, tactical or medium term, here basically will include the budgeting, the purchasing and supply system, and organization. Therefore, thereof purchasing and supply methods, negotiation, development of human resource interface, contracting and employing cost reduction techniques. So all of this falls under the tactical or the middle management level. In terms of the operations, here plans basically are formulated to allow the daily functioning of the purchasing and supply function to proceed as smoothly as possible. So here basically is for them to ensure that whatever that is being given to them is being expedient, keeping records, maintaining purchasing and supply system, invoice clearance, handling of acquisition, inquiries and quotation and pricing. So that is in terms of the planning decision of a manager, which is being categorized under these three levels. In terms of formulation of objective, it is one of the most important planning, and the formulation of objectives, basically we can summarize them by a table. So by the table, which we're going to see in the next slide. So in terms of the planning objectives, in terms of the formulation of objectives, so we have a business objective and we see how planning and objectives come in. So to retain the market share, to share if your objective is to retain the market share, then the supply and purchasing and supply objective here is to search for more unique product in the supply market. If your objective is to move from this specialty market to a general market, then it's to seek new and larger suppliers and to develop new market flow system to handle large quantities. To develop specific new products and services is to seek or develop new suppliers, and to develop an overall production capacity plan is to develop systems that integrate capacity planning and purchasing. To initiate cost reduction plan is to standardize materials and reduce suppliers. So this is one in terms of the management, the function of a manager. Now, as a manager, you plan. As a manager, you plan. If you plan to, you need to organize. And in terms of organizing and organization, involves the creation of structure of responsibilities and authorities for the purchasing and supply function, and the organization of purchasing and supply to realize purchasing and supply objectives. So that is basically in terms of the organization structure of a manager, this is what involves. We can summarize this organizational structure in terms of four main functions. So one is the purchasing and of supply function in the organizational structure, and the internal organization of the purchasing department. So the internal organization of purchasing and supply function. We can also talk about the coordination with other functional management areas. So as a manager, you also may have to coordinate with the other functional in terms of financial management operations, because if you are not there, you are not there. And if you're not there, they are also not there. So there should be some kind of coordination with other functional management areas. And we can also talk about the cross-functional terms. So the cross-functional terms here basically is the organizing the purchasing and supply function according to the supply chain management approach. So whether in a small or business, entrepreneur or anything, these are four functional duties in terms of organizing. When you are organizing, in terms of organizing role of the purchasing managers, within the organizational structure is to know the place of purchase, and the place of purchase is basically affected by two main systems. That is what we call the centralization or the decentralization. So in the centralized is where maybe the purchase of raw materials is done by a central, all the raw materials that are needed for the whole company is done by one central management. And if in other stands can be decentralized, so maybe they may have different depots or different departments or different locations in terms of maybe purchases from a different company, the same company in Limpopo would be different from in Johannesburg, would be different from Cape Town. So Cape Town will do their own purchase. So it is a decentralized form of system. So this is basically what we are talking about. This is basically what we are talking about. Now, we've also talked about the coordination among the functional with other functional managers. So as I said, with being under being the operations purchasing and supply management department, you should also be able to coordinate with other functional duties. So for example, in terms of operations, what is the level of goods that are needed to be purchased? What is the right amount of goods, the quantity that is needed in the production process? In terms of the functional management, now as an operations and management, as you go through the process to execute or to undergo purchase, it is the financial manager that you need in order to execute the final payment. So there is some form of coordination that needs to take place. All this coordination has been categorized into three. One, the various purchases and supply must be coordinated internally in the purchase and supply function. And two, the purchasing environment must be coordinated with purchasing and supply activities. And three, the purchasing and supply function must be coordinated with other functional management areas, as well as the needs of the final consumers. So basically, this is all what I've been talking about, which I've summarized in these three steps. Okay, so another important duties of role of the management as a manager is to the cross-functional duty. So the cross-functional duty is that you must coordinate with other departments or other areas in order for you to and be more responsible. So a cross-functional sourcing team, you have to, in terms of team, consist of a personnel from at least 3 functions brought together to execute a purchasing related materials assignment or to solve a purchasing related problem. So in terms of when you're going to purchase, you have to coordinate. It's not just about you being purchasing and supplier manager, but you should also be able to employ certain aspects in different fields. So you have to, in terms of finance, somebody to negotiate, in terms of somebody to assess the quality of the goods, evaluate the goods of the things that are coming. And this objective is very, very important in terms of sourcing teams. And you are able to help you to obtain a wide perspectives in terms of problems, in terms of negotiations and thinking. So in terms of the task of the cross-sectional sourcing team, that is when you bring people of different to add to you as a manager to in terms of when you're purchasing. It helps you in the supply selection, in terms of your negotiating cooperation. It also helps you in terms of your cost reduction strategies, in terms of your sourcing strategy, and also developing suppliers and the evaluation of supplier performance. So these are one of the important functions of a manager in terms of executing it. Another important aspect in terms of the manager is to control. So basically, it looks like we are talking about the functions of management, that is planning, organizing, control. So now you're looking at control. So in terms of a manager, one thing that you should be responsible for is to control in terms of the purchasing and supply function. So control is very essential in the sense that once you try to execute something, you have to make sure that the process in terms of purchasing something have gone through laid down procedures. So in basic top companies, realize that we have certain standards in terms of purchasing. You don't just get up and pull and purchase. You have certain process that you need to go through to make sure that whatever that you are purchasing is of standard. And that is what we call tendering, where competitive bidding, where people will put their, try to assess, go through this process, procurement and all those things comes here. So you must make sure that there are certain standard process where you are able to go through. And once this process are being followed, it is your responsibility to ensure that all the purchasing processes are being followed. That is in terms of your control abilities. And also specific attention is given to the management tasks in terms of the supply and purchasing and supply function and the performance of the supply and purchasing and supply activities. So through control, you're able to assess the performance in terms of the purchasing and supply. Is it working, or do you need to adapt a new means of trying to obtain the network that you need for your business to survive? And in terms of obtaining the network that you need, you also have to ensure that you create that network of customs. You have to have customers, people that you can easily rely anytime for supply of raw materials, because you've been able to have that goodwill. And even when you have that goodwill, in terms of when the functional duty of the finance is not being paid, you are able to use this process to attain advanced supply before you pay later. And this is all due to coordination and trust between the manager of purchasing and supply and the other person supplying or suppliers. As a manager too, you have to assess and evaluate the management function that is being played. So it is also an essential aspect of your duty, and you must either use questionnaires or evaluation techniques to evaluate how is the function, how is the flow of materials, are they arriving on time, are they quality. Once you're able to evaluate this, assess this performance role, you'll be able to improve upon business techniques or adapt new strategies that will help your business to grow. So here we are looking at some of the assessment techniques or assessment tools that you can use to assess in terms of your management rules. So you can talk about price proficiency here. You compare the actual price. Maybe you budgeted for the raw materials. You want to buy one for R5 and you go to buy it for R6. You try to budget and compare whether the actual price sorry about that. We compare whether the actual price is same as the budgeted price. You can also look at the supplier's function. Now, in terms of the supplier's performance, that is whether orders are arriving on time or late, then you can know how to put in process to expedite the process. You can also talk about timeliness. You can talk about cost saving. That is, you compare costs with those of previous periods. You can talk about the workload in terms of looking at the number of orders and requisitions. You can talk about the purchasing costs. You can talk about the inventory holding. Are you holding the right amount of goods available so that you don't, because the more inventory you hold, if you hold more stocks in your warehouse, it costs you because the cost of the warehouse and the things not being purchased. So it comes at a cost. So you always have to make sure that you hold the right amount of goods in stocks. Then you can also talk about the relationship performance. That is, are they having good relationship, which I've talked about. It is very good to have a good relationship with your suppliers, so that even if the payment is delayed, you will still be able to supply you because you have that goodwill with them and they trust that you're going to execute your decision. And you also have relationship with other functional managers. So as I talked about that, all these functional managers in terms of operations, finance are all related. And it's one of the ways that you can use to assess whether you are actually improving or ways to improve your performance. So in terms of purchasing, trying to purchase the goods or the purchasing, there are some process that basically lay down process companies you go through. And basically here we are trying to discuss or describe some of the few process you are supposed to go through. So steps of purchasing a supplier, basically one, to development and a description of the need. So what you are going to purchase, you have to describe what is needed, the purpose of it. You also have to choose suppliers. So you ask suppliers to the suppliers to present themselves, and with these suppliers that have present themselves, they should be registered. They should have good background. You have to check their background and make sure that these suppliers that they are supplying, they are actually goods are actually of they are good suppliers, because not everybody that it says is a supplier is a supplier. Some people tend to, that's why some companies tend to use as corruption. They tend to register their own businesses and try to sell back to the company. So you have to make sure that's a registered supplier, which are already of good standing. You also have to research on the price and availability. So you have to look at the price lists in terms of what is the quotation, what is the price for the market, and so that you can make comparison. So once you compare and see in terms of the prices, then you can issue an order and concluding a contract. So you issue an order, and once you issue an order, you must follow up and see whether those orders are being the timing, they are being brought in time. Once they are, you follow up and you expedite that order being that you've issued, then you received inspection. You go and see the order. You have to go and inspect in terms of receiving the goods, inspect them and make sure that what you ordered is basically what is being given to you. If you ordered for coal, you are getting coal, not coal, and you are getting something different, because sometimes you order and the thing comes, you do not check, and before you go to the warehouse, realizes that this is not what you basically ordered for. So even this one may even apply to our own normal means of ordering, in terms of when you're ordering something online. Some of this process may pertain to our kind of day-to-day purchases. So in terms of you inspecting and the distribution, then you have to address any errors or discrepancy that you may have encountered, that, oh, these goods may have not be up to standard. You ordered for 5,000, it's only 3,000 in stock. You have to check all those things to know the discrepancy. You ordered for 5,000, you're getting 5,000, which means that it is of good in terms of the quality and everything. So if it is not, you try to make sure that you solve the discrepancy that will be emanating from the what you actually wanted and what has been given to you. Now, once you are able to solve this, then you move on to pay, because you, first of all, you move on to pay. That is, you pay for the goods and then close the order. So these are some few steps that maybe we should have in mind when we are trying to be purchasing and supply managers in companies that we are. One of the functions we've talked about is quality, in terms of and determining the functions of purchasing and supply is to determine the right quality. So quality is very, very important, and it is very, very separable from purchasing and supply. If you have a top quality material, you can sell it at higher prices and you have the market. If it's a low quality, you sell it at lower price, and vice versa. So quality of a material basically influences a whole lot. It influences the inventory holding or in terms of the amount that will be kept in stock, in terms of the requirements, in terms of everything. So quality is very, very important. And in terms of quality, we can talk about three main things. That is, how do we determine the right quality in terms of the description of a quality and in terms of controlling. So right quality is that quality that is purchased at the lowest price. The right quality is that quality that is purchased at the lowest price, which satisfies a specific need and performs the function of which it is purchased for. So how do we determine the right quantity? If you determine the right quantity, then one thing is that we need technical consideration. If you are going to buy oil, crude oil, you must go with people who have the technical know-how to know that this is crude oil, so that you don't end up buying a cooking oil for a whole country, and this may actually affect the country. So if you determine the right quality, you must go with technical people who really understand, and you also have to also consider the end user in terms of understanding. If you are buying from somebody, you have to understand that what you are buying is there of the quality. So if it is even cooking oil, we have different. We have the olive oil, we have other types. You must make sure that you have that technical people who understand the differences between these two before you purchase. And in terms of the end user too, in terms of the marketing function or the person that you are being sold to. Now, we also have to consider that whether those person to the quantity, the good that you are producing, are they going to satisfy the need? Because if you say that you are producing Pepsodent and it's going to take care of producing a cream that takes care of people's pimples, and the people are using it and they are not seeing the effect on them, which means that the quality may not be, and the end user will not have that kind of commercial consideration for your business. So it is very important to consider all these factors. Another important factor is also in terms of the description of a quality, the description of the quality. Now, in terms of the description of the quality, that is where it comes with specification and standardization. So specification, what are the specifics required involved in producing something? So the general method of describing quality is that you have to specify, standardize. Is it up to the standard that is needed? Because if something is being produced in the market and you try to come in, you have to make sure that you have to produce to that standard. There's a standard. In terms of bread production in South Africa, there is standardization. In terms of specification, every bread may have to have this specification, this component. In terms of even yogurt or other products that are being produced, how are they specified? You specify the ingredient that are used in producing, and you also specify that as standardization. This standardization or the specification may also come by when is it going to expire, when is it going to when is it going to expire or any other thing. So specification are the most general method of describing the quality. So specification are most general method of describing the quality. In terms of uniformity, in terms of the technical composition, in terms of the physical features, all of this comes with specification. And in terms of standardization, is further aid in terms of describing the quality. So standardization basically involves how was the thing produced, the method, the practice, the technical form. So standardization in terms of a business can give you the added advantage in terms of you trying to get the quality of good to the market. So how do you control the quality? Another way to ensure the quality is to control, and in controlling is inspection. So sometimes if you want to produce a particular good, you have to take it to a board where, for example, if you cannot just stand up and produce anything, there is a standard a board that controls the quality of goods that goes. If you are somebody who produces medicine, there is a certificate that is given to people who cook in this restaurant, people who cook in there, who produces medicine. All these are forms of trying to control the quality of goods that are being produced to the market. And it's not just that, they also need to inspect. So once you apply for them, they come to your place to inspect whether the place of cooking is healthy enough and everything. They give you standardization. So the South African has its own standardization method. We also have the international standards where when you're producing to the international market, there are certain standards you need to meet before your goods can get to the international market. So this is where the African Continental Free Trade comes in. If you want your goods to be able to produce, your small market to be able to be produced to other countries, you must make sure that in terms of your purchasing and supply of commodities that you are using or raw materials you're using to produce the goods that you are producing, it should have certain standards, and that standard should be upheld. And we're talking about the quality. Now we are talking about the quantity. And in terms of the quantity, these are things I've already talked about. Maybe I would just have to maybe re-echo it again. In terms of the quantity, that is inventory holding, which I've talked about the inventory, that is the amount of goods or stocks that are kept in the in warehouses or places. And these are needed for operations to continue so that there wouldn't be any interruptions. If it is too much too, it comes at a cost to the firm. So these are some of the things that you have to know. So it allows businesses to utilize cost savings through longer production runs and volume discount. So once you are able to have the right amount of goods in store, you are able to keep the right quantity of goods and services that are needed to be produced each day and each time. And holding inventory too also comes at a cost. So the current cost, that is the cost of involved in keeping inventory. The storage cost and those things comes here. Then we also have the ordering, that is the cost when you are placing an order. So for example, in terms of procurement and other stuffs, online procurement, telephone cost, and inbound transportation, posting cost, all those two also comes here. Then the total inventory cost. So the total inventory cost involves the cost, the sum of all carrying costs and the ordering costs. So the sum of these first two gives us the total inventory cost. So holding inventory comes at a cost to a business. So in terms of a decision to what is the right amount of goods to be purchased or the terms of quantity, there are various inventory control systems that we can look at. And these control systems have been listed here. So the first one is the system of fixed order quantity. So the fixed order quantity here, basically we place an order and a fixed amount in terms of a certain level that we will require in terms of your production process. So in terms of production process, and here the advantage is because attention is focused on a specific item. So once attention is focused on a specific item and you know that this amount is what is needed at every particular point in time, we are able to fix order for a fixed quantity. In terms of the cyclical order system, that one you may order for a fixed quantity, but it may vary at a particular point in time. So in the period of maybe rainy season, there are certain quantity that you order, but it may vary in terms of dry season. So during a particular point in time, there is some variation. And the material requirement planning system, with that one, what it basically does is that you use computerized system to calculate for what is being needed in terms of the production process. So you may use a computerized to calculate the total need for materials that are basically required in the production period, in a given period of time, Then we also have the just-in system. So the just-in system, basically here, it takes away the inventory holding idea that you only purchase what is needed at a particular point in time that are being used in the production. So you don't have to even keep them in stocks or in warehouses. So in just-in system, the idea is that if you trust your suppliers, you know that when your business is about to start, you are able to get the goods at that particular point in time and you are able to order. Now we can also talk about the quick response or the automatic replenish system. So here, basically what happens is that manufacturers try to provide products and services to its retail customers in exact quantities on a continuous basis with minimal lead time, resulting in minimum inventory levels. So with your customers that you try to respond to, you try to keep respond to them at a fixed amount, and you're able to supply the goods to consumers in continuous basis in a particular lead time so that you don't have to suffer. The last one we are going to talk about is the efficient consumer response system. So this system was basically created for grocery industry. And one thing is that it relies on timely, accurate, and paperless flow of information. So with this efficient system, they believe that when there's timely, accurate, and paperless flow of information, the system becomes efficient. It becomes efficient. It also relies on electronic data interchange and strategic alliance between supply chain members. So the goal is to eliminate costs such as inventory and other holding costs in the supply chain management. And this is very good for a business. Now we move to discuss the selection process. And in the selection process, one thing you should know is that once you're selecting the right suppliers, there are certain advantages and disadvantages that will come with. So you should be able to make sure that you select the right suppliers, particularly in the supply of strategic materials or services. Because if you're in certain materials and services, when you're able to get the right people, you are able to get the needed benefit you need. If not, you also suffer as a business. And in terms of the selection process, we have outlined these following steps where, as a purchasing and supply manager, you can follow in terms of your selection process of the right suppliers. So compilation of a list of suppliers. You should also be able to reduce the list to a short list. Shortlist suppliers requested to give a quote and negotiate with them as stated. Then you choose a supplier through the negotiation. You'll be able to know that who is giving you a better offer and evaluation of supply performance, whether the supplier is doing well. So these are the process involved in terms of selecting suppliers, the right supplier. So sometimes as a purchasing and supplier, your process of selecting can also help to develop suppliers. And one thing you have to have in mind is that your relationship with suppliers, it can be short-term and long-term. And as a suppliers chain management, once you are willing to have this goodwill with suppliers, you should think about the long-term benefit. So some of the process in terms of developing suppliers is what we call the black economic empowerment. So here, large organizations can help suppliers to also develop. So if you're able to, even suppliers that are not able to have that full-fledged or able to have that kind of economic empowerment, once you're able to demand more from them, they're able to stand out and also become a full-fledged supplier. So if, for example, you need certain particular commodity and only few people are supplying, once you're able to buy and you keep on buying more from them, you empower them for them to grow into a larger extent, more powerful, and also to help solve inequalities and other increasing pressure on small businesses, even in South Africa here. We can also talk about materials or service not available. So because of materials and service not available, what you can do is that you can go into contract with certain companies who supply so that they can, you can have that kind of ability to and get the materials in terms of supply needs that you need. You can also talk about the normal performance appraisal. And here we're saying that it can contribute to the development of identifying their weaknesses and encouraging them to perform better. So this is an important factor in establishing a successful long-term ties with suppliers. It's establishing long-term ties with suppliers. And I've also talked about the fact that establishing a long-term relationship with suppliers is very, very key. It's very, very key in the sense that even if there's a problem or there's some sort of financial constraint, this long-term relationship have that kind of trust, and organizations will we have easy to get certain products, even if you've not paid for it. There's alliance in terms of partnership, certain attributes, interdependence, cooperations, and quality improvement. All of this, those through long-term relationship, you're able to ensure this quality and supply system being put in place. In all what we've discussed from our beginning is that business, one major objective is to make profit. And it's making profit. One thing is that you have to know the value of the things that you sell. And identifying the best price is very, very important. So one way to get a good price is that consumers' behavior, though we've talked about today that when the quality is high, price is high. But consumers, basically, in the basic economic sense, respond inversely with price. The higher the price, the more being bought. So as a business owner, you should have the tendency that you produce quality goods, and you also try to make sure that you get the best price for it, and the best price which would be able to attract the market. And in determining the best price, basically, one thing that you should also know is that it depends on the nature of materials and the value of transaction. So it depends on the nature of materials that you are purchasing, the value of transaction in terms of how you are going to buy. And in terms of the price too, there are certain things that basically we look out for market information, including the catalog, brochures, and advertisement in trade journals. All of this comes in to affect the unit cost, and also in terms of the price you are going to sell. So you have to be able to know in terms of the goods you are purchasing, or the value and price decision, determination of the price you are buying from others. So in terms of when you're buying it from others, you can look at the quotation and tender, suitable, less standardized materials of high monetary value. You must know the quotation. So quotations are quick and informal. It can be made through either the telephone or others. Quotation are used when standardized materials are purchased, and they are also suitable for non-standard or customary things. So in terms of tenders are accompanied by drawn out procedure that has to be followed to the letter. So these are means of we determine the price of a good. One important aspect in terms of purchasing and supply, which we cannot forgo, is to talk about timing. And the timing of purchases is very, very important. Knowing the right time to buy. And that is one thing that even as business students or as students in terms of marketing or business field, you should know. Sometimes you may buy the right thing at the wrong time, and it's just not right. So doing the right thing at the wrong time is still not right. So you must know the right time to buy, and knowing the right time to buy will ensure that your business is supplied on an ongoing basis. The things are being operational. There's no break in the business process. You are also able to reduce the risk of price fluctuation. So you know when to buy, knowing that this time when you buy, the price is okay. At a particular time when you buy, the price increases. So when should you buy? You must know the right time to buy so that you'll be able to avoid these price fluctuations, even the dollar system. Now, if you're somebody who purchases or buys things based on foreign currency, and now that the dollar is down, people will be able to buy more. Now, when the dollar price goes higher, it means that the price is going to increase. So then you cannot buy more. So you have to know when to buy more and when not to buy less. And it is also helping to keep inventory holding at an optimal level, in the sense that once you're able to know the right time to buy, you don't have to stock more goods in the warehouse so that you might not know when to use them or when to use them. So these are important aspect. Now you can also talk about the factors influencing the scheduling of purchase. So the factors influencing the scheduling of purchase, we have internal factors and we have external factors. So some of the internal factors we can talk about business policy in terms of trying to prevent speculative motive in terms of businesses. We can also talk about the fact that changes in markets and operations and requirements. We can also talk about fiscal facilities such as storage. These are all important internal factors. In terms of external factors, basically external factors tend to determine the time of purchase and the market conditions and government regulations. So government regulations tend to, these are other external factors that can affect the scheduling of purchasing. So in period of recession, in period of depreciation or recession, what happens? How do those kind of external activities influence people's decision to purchase? Which I've even talked about the fact that such an external environment, such as the exchange rate market, for example, can tend to affect people's decision in terms of what they purchase. Now internally basically involves things that are basically situated with the business itself in terms of the physical space. Do you have more space to buy more today? If you're not, like the physical facilities, the market changes, operations, and those things. But external factors are basically things, government regulations and the market conditions, things that are external, that tends to affect, which I've talked about, the fact that we can talk about issues such as during recession, people tend not to buy more, and depreciation, lead time, and other reliability supply. All of this tends to affect purchasing. So basically, this is what we've discussed so far on purchasing and supply. Let me conclude by saying that purchasing and supply is an important aspect in business, and we cannot ignore. As a business, we must know that there are certain standard processes that involve in purchasing and supply. Everybody can buy, but in terms of trying to identify the right quality, the right quantity, and the actual trying to establish a long-term relationship with consumers, when to buy, which we have talked about, the right timing to purchase, the seasonal moments in terms of keeping inventory low, in terms of the process when you're going to buy something for a business, the coordination that purchasing and supply manager should have with other combination. We've talked about all those things. So basically all this summarize, I try to summarize to this lecture so that we can get back to our lecture room and we'll have enough discussion on other issues. On this note, I would say thank you for your attention.